Across Amish kitchens, even the simplest ingredients turn into hearty, family-sized meals that cost next to nothing. While food prices keep climbing, the Amish have quietly mastered the art of eating well for almost free. These 25 cheap Amish meals aren't just budget savers. They're proof that comfort, tradition, and good taste don't need a big price tag. Amish dumpling soup. The Amish have been making dumpling soup since their first winters in Pennsylvania, turning the simplest pantry items into something that could feed a family of 8. This wasn't just cooking. It was survival math wrapped in steam and comfort. They call the tiny dough crumbles rivels, which sounds fancy until you realize it's just German for to rub, because that's exactly what Amish cooks do. Rub flour, egg, and water between their fingers until it forms these little pearls of dough that drop right into boiling broth. The genius isn't in what goes into the pot, it's in what doesn't need to. No expensive cuts of meat, no imported spices, no ingredients that require a trip to town. Just flour that costs pennies per pound, 1 egg, and whatever broth happens to be simmering on the stove. Chicken broth if there's been a recent butchering, potato broth if the cellar's full, plain water if times are particularly tight. The rivels puff up and thicken the whole thing, turning thin soup into something substantial enough to keep farmers working through afternoon chores. Some folks spend more on their daily coffee habit than the Amish spend feeding their entire family soup for a week, which makes you wonder who's really got their priorities straight. What makes this a true one-pot meal is how it handles itself. The rivels don't need to be pre-cooked or prepared separately. They go straight from your fingers into the bubbling pot, cooking in minutes and soaking up every bit of flavor from the broth. By the time you've cleaned your hands, dinner's ready. Every old Amish cookbook from Lancaster to Ohio has some version of this recipe, usually scribbled in the margins or written on pages so worn the paper feels like fabric. Tomato gravy over biscuits. When the Amish first settled Lancaster County, tomatoes were still called love apples, and most people thought they were poisonous. The Amish knew better. They started canning tomatoes by the hundreds, and when winter came around and the meat supply ran low, someone got creative with what was sitting in the cellar. That's how tomato gravy was born. Equal parts ingenuity and necessity. The process couldn't be simpler. Open a jar of home-canned tomatoes, pour them into a hot pan with milk and a spoonful of flour for thickness. Stir until it turns into something that coats a spoon, then ladle it over whatever biscuits are available, fresh if it's Sunday, day old if it's a regular Tuesday. The tanginess from the tomatoes cuts through the richness of the milk, creating something that tastes far more complex than its 3 ingredients suggest. Amish families served this as a main course, not a side dish, and nobody left the table hungry. What's remarkable is how this dish proves flavor doesn't come from expensive ingredients. The tomatoes bring acidity and sweetness, the milk adds body and richness, the flour holds everything together. Some families add a pinch of sugar if the tomatoes are particularly acidic. Others swear by a crack of black pepper, but the base recipe stays the same because it doesn't need improvement. This was meatless eating before anyone called it trendy, budget cooking before anyone wrote books about it. The Amish were just being practical, turning summer's abundance into winter's comfort without spending money they didn't have. Fried bread and bacon drippings. Nothing went to waste in an Amish kitchen, especially not bacon drippings. While modern cooks pour that liquid gold down the drain, Amish families saved every drop in jars kept near the stove. When bread went stale, and it always did because they baked in large batches, it got a second life in a hot cast iron skillet slicked with those drippings. The transformation was immediate. Hard bread turned crispy on the outside, tender on the inside, infused with smoky flavor that made it taste like an indulgence rather than leftovers. The timing mattered more than the technique. Too long in the pan and you'd get charcoal. Too short and you'd have greasy bread that nobody wanted. Amish cooks learned to watch for the exact moment when the edges turned golden brown and the surface developed tiny bubbles. That's when you flipped it, gave the other side the same treatment, and pulled it from the heat. Served alongside eggs for breakfast or slathered with apple butter, this fried bread turned what should have been chicken feed into a meal that stuck to your ribs through morning chores. One grandmother always said her bacon drippings jar was worth more than her jewelry box, and considering she never wore jewelry anyway, she might have been onto something. The beauty of this dish lies in its economics. Stale bread costs nothing because you already paid for it when it was fresh. Bacon drippings are free because they're a byproduct of cooking bacon you were going to eat anyway. Even the fuel cost was minimal. The cast iron held heat so well that you could fry an entire loaf's worth of bread using residual warmth from cooking the morning's eggs. This wasn't just frugal cooking, it was resourcefulness elevated to an art form, proving that the best meals sometimes come from refusing to throw anything away. Corn pudding. Sweet corn was one of the first crops Amish farmers planted when they arrived in America, and they learned quickly that it could be more than just a side vegetable. Corn pudding emerged as one of those dishes that blurred the line between dessert and dinner, showing up at church suppers in the same spread as roasted meat and berry pies. The Amish made it with whatever milk they had, fresh from that morning's milking, combined with corn kernels, eggs, and just enough sugar to bring out the natural sweetness without turning it into candy. The baking process created something with a texture unlike anything else on the table. The bottom set firm like custard, while the top developed a golden crust that crackled under a spoon. Some families used fresh corn, sliced straight from the cob during summer. Others relied on home-canned corn when snow covered the fields. The dish tasted different depending on which you used. Fresh corn brought a crisp sweetness. Canned corn delivered a softer, more caramelized flavor. Both versions had their devoted followers, and debates about which was superior could last longer than the church service itself. What made corn pudding a thrifty favorite was its flexibility. It worked as a side dish next to pork chops, but it could also serve as dessert when supper needed stretching. Kids loved it because of the sweetness. Adults appreciated it because corn and milk were two things an Amish farm never ran short of. The recipe survived from the early 1800s, not because it was fancy or complicated, but because it was reliable. You could make it with your eyes closed, it never failed to turn out right, and it used ingredients that were always within arm's reach. The only product we'll ever promote on our channel is a book by Claude Davis, a veteran prepper, about 126 superfoods and preservation methods from crisis times like the Great Depression and wartime that are impossible to find elsewhere. We decided to promote his book because we are the last generation able to share these techniques and superfoods to our children or grandchildren. It would be a shame to see this information about highly nutritious foods and preservation methods to survive crises disappear. You can also find a book about herbal remedies from Nicole Apelian on their store. If you're watching this on TV, you can look up our channel, Frugal Solutions, on your phone or tablet and find the books by clicking the link in our channel description or any other video description. Brown butter noodles. The Amish relationship with noodles runs deep. They make them by hand, hang them to dry on wooden racks, and store them in cloth bags that last through winter. Brown butter noodles represent the pinnacle of doing more with less. Take those homemade egg noodles, boil them until tender, then toss them in butter that's been heated just past the melting point until it turns golden and develops a nutty aroma. Add salt. That's the entire recipe, and it's been on Amish dinner tables since their grandparents' were cooking in log cabins. The trick is in the butter. Plain melted butter makes the noodles slippery and rich, but brown butter transforms them into something that tastes complex and deliberate. Amish cooks learned to watch the butter carefully as it heated, waiting for that exact moment when the milk solids turned amber and the kitchen filled with a smell like toasted hazelnuts. Pull it off the heat too early and you've just got regular butter. Leave it too long and you've got burned butter that tastes bitter and wrong. The window of perfection lasted maybe 30 seconds, and experienced cooks could hit it without even looking. Some said watching butter brown required more concentration than threading a needle in dim lamplight. And considering how much sewing happened by lamplight in Amish homes, that was saying something. What's striking about this dish is its complete lack of pretension. No herbs, no garlic, no cheese, no spices, just noodles, butter, and salt. The Amish proved that comfort food doesn't need a long ingredient list or complicated techniques. It needs good ingredients treated with respect and attention. Those homemade noodles had substance that store-bought versions couldn't match. The eggs came from chickens scratching in the yard, the butter from cream skimmed that morning. Every component brought quality, so the final dish needed nothing else. This was side dish perfection achieved through simplicity, showing up at nearly every Amish dinner because it worked with everything and pleased everyone. Pickled eggs and beet brine. Hard-boiled eggs presented a preservation problem for Amish families before refrigeration became common. You could keep them in the root cellar for a while, but eventually they'd go bad. Then someone realized that leftover beet juice, that deep purple liquid left in jars after all the pickled beets were eaten, could preserve eggs for weeks without any cold storage. Drop peeled hard-boiled eggs into that brine, wait a few days, and you'd have eggs that were tangy, slightly sweet, and stained the most remarkable shade of pink. The color made them popular at gatherings. Amish weddings, picnics, and church lunches featured bowls of these vibrant eggs that looked almost too pretty to eat. Kids loved them for the novelty. Adults appreciated them for the flavor. Vinegar and beet sweetness soaked all the way through to the yolk, creating something that tasted nothing like a plain boiled egg. The brine also made them easier to digest for people who found regular eggs too heavy, though nobody quite understood why that worked. The economics made perfect sense. You were going to pickle beets anyway because they grew like weeds in Amish gardens and needed preserving. After eating the beets, you had all this flavored vinegar brine that seemed wasteful to pour out. Eggs were abundant. Every chicken laid one most days, and large Amish families had dozens of chickens. Combining the leftover brine with excess eggs created something that kept for weeks, needed no special storage, and could be packed in lunches or served as quick protein when someone needed energy between meals. This was zero-waste cooking before that phrase existed, turning two abundant resources into something both practical and delicious. The eggs also served as conversation starters at community meals because nothing gets people talking quite like bright pink food that tastes better than it has any right to. Oat pancakes with sorghum. Before wheat flour became affordable and widely available, Amish farmers grew oats for their horses and had the good sense to realize humans could eat them too. Ground oats mixed with milk and eggs made a pancake batter that cooked up dense and hearty. Nothing like the fluffy buttermilk pancakes that became popular later. These pancakes had weight and substance, the kind that kept a farmer full from breakfast through midday without needing a snack. Topped with sorghum syrup, they delivered sweetness and energy in equal measure. Sorghum was the Amish answer to expensive maple syrup. They grew the cane themselves, pressed out the juice, and boiled it down into a dark, thick syrup that tasted earthy and complex. It didn't have maple's delicate sweetness. Sorghum brought a more robust, almost molasses-like flavor that paired perfectly with the grainy taste of oat pancakes. Some families preferred it to maple, claiming the stronger flavor stood up better to hearty foods. Others just appreciated that it came from their own fields and cost nothing but labor. The combination became a rural breakfast staple among Amish farmers who needed serious fuel before heading out to fields. One stack of oat pancakes with sorghum could power someone through hours of physical work, plowing, harvesting, building, whatever the day demanded. Modern protein bars and energy drinks claim to do the same thing, but they cost a fortune and come wrapped in plastic. The Amish figured out the original power breakfast using bulk staples they bought once or twice a year and syrup they made themselves. The pancakes weren't light or fancy, but they worked, and that mattered more than refinement when you had a full day of hard work ahead. Farmer's skillet. Morning chores meant early rising, and early rising meant breakfast needed to be fast, filling, and made from whatever was already cooked. The farmer's skillet solved all three problems at once. Take yesterday's boiled potatoes, slice them up, and fry them in a cast iron pan with onions until everything gets crispy around the edges. Crack a few eggs on top, let them cook until the whites set, and you've got a complete meal that took less time than hitching up the horses. The Amish version of hash came together in about 10 minutes and fed whoever showed up at the table. The cast iron pan did most of the work. Amish cooks kept their skillets seasoned so well that nothing stuck and everything browned perfectly. The potatoes got crispy without turning greasy, the onions caramelized without burning, and the eggs cooked with edges that were lacy and golden. No fancy non-stick coating needed, just a pan that had been cooking breakfast for possibly decades and knew exactly what to do. Some families had cast iron skillets that got passed down through generations, and the seasoning only improved with age. Those old pans had cooked so many breakfasts they could probably fry an egg in their sleep, which would be convenient, except nobody trusts sleeping cookware. Adding bacon grease elevated the whole thing if there was any on hand, but the dish didn't require meat to be satisfying. The potatoes provided bulk and comfort, the onions added sweetness and depth, the eggs brought protein and richness. Everything cooked in one pan, which meant only one thing to wash, a consideration that mattered when water had to be heated on the stove and hauled from the well. This was efficient cooking born from necessity, proving that convenience food existed long before anyone invented the microwave. The Amish just used heat, iron, and common sense instead of electricity and packaging. Cabbage and apple slaw. Cabbage grew reliably in Amish gardens even when other crops struggled, and apples dropped from trees with more abundance than any family could eat fresh. Combining them created a side dish that was crunchy, refreshing, and lasted for days without refrigeration. Important when your cold storage was just a cellar dug into a hillside. Amish cooks shredded the cabbage by hand, using knives that could reduce a whole head to thin ribbons in minutes, then mixed it with sliced apples and a dressing made from vinegar and sugar boiled together into a light syrup. The flavor balanced perfectly between sweet and sour. The cabbage brought crunch and a slight bitterness. The apples added fruity sweetness, and the vinegar syrup tied everything together while helping preserve the whole mixture. It worked alongside rich, heavy foods like pork or beef, cutting through the fat with its brightness. Amish families served it at summer picnics and winter dinners with equal success. The vinegar prevented the apples from browning and kept the cabbage crisp for days. What made this slaw economical was how it used produce that was nearly free. Cabbage cost pennies per pound when bought, nothing when grown in your own garden. Apples literally fell from trees, and even the drops that were too bruised to sell or eat fresh worked perfectly fine when sliced into slaw. The vinegar and sugar were pantry staples bought in bulk. The labor involved was minimal. Some slicing, some stirring, done. This was garden abundance turned into something that improved meals without adding expense. The kind of practical cooking that defined Amish kitchens and kept families eating well regardless of their budget. Buttermilk dumplings. Winter soups in Amish kitchens started thin. A ham bone or some vegetables simmering in water, providing flavor but not much substance. That's where buttermilk dumplings came in, transforming modest soup into a meal that filled bellies and stuck to ribs through cold afternoons. The dough came together quickly from buttermilk and flour, mixed just enough to hold together, then dropped by spoonfuls into boiling broth. The dumplings puffed up as they cooked, absorbing liquid and flavor while adding body to the soup. The buttermilk made all the difference in texture. Regular milk dumplings turned out dense and heavy, but buttermilk's acidity reacted with the flour to create dumplings that were tender and light despite their filling nature. Amish cooks knew this long before food scientists explained the chemistry behind it. They just knew that buttermilk worked better, so that's what they used. The slight tang from the buttermilk also added flavor complexity to the finished dumplings, making them taste more interesting than their simple ingredient list suggested. This was traditional filler cooking at its finest, taking small portions of meat or vegetables and stretching them into meals that could feed large families. One chicken that might provide meat for 4 people could feed 8 when you added buttermilk dumplings to the pot. The dumplings soaked up the chicken broth, carrying that flavor in every bite while bulking up the overall meal. It was mathematical as much as culinary. More dumplings meant less meat needed, but nobody felt shortchanged because the soup was satisfying and complete. The Amish invention of making pots stretched further through strategic additions rather than expensive ingredients, showed an understanding of both nutrition and economics that kept families fed through lean winters when every food decision mattered. Mothers always said good dumplings could make water taste like chicken soup, and while that might be exaggerating, they certainly came close enough that nobody complained. Liver and onions Amish style. Most modern Americans wrinkle their noses at liver, but the Amish recognized it as cheap, nutritious protein that shouldn't go to waste. When a cow or pig was butchered, every part had value, and liver, full of iron and protein, deserved better than becoming pet food. Amish cooks developed a preparation method that made liver tender and palatable, even for those who claimed they didn't like it. Thin slices of beef liver got fried quickly with plenty of onions and a splash of vinegar, the acidity cutting through the strong flavor and improving the texture. The onions played a crucial role beyond just adding flavor. They released moisture and sweetness as they cooked, creating a natural sauce that coated the liver and mellowed its intensity. The vinegar did something similar, its acid breaking down the liver's strong metallic taste into something more balanced and savory. Cooked properly, which meant quickly over high heat, until just done but not overcooked, the liver stayed tender instead of turning tough and rubbery. Served with mashed potatoes and gravy, it became a complete meal that cost pennies per serving. The nutritional benefits made liver particularly valuable in Amish communities where physical labor was constant and bodies needed proper fuel. One serving of liver provided more iron than a week's worth of other meats, helping prevent fatigue and keeping energy levels steady through long workdays. Pregnant women and growing children ate it regularly, understanding its health value even if they didn't always love the taste. This was practical nutrition focused on what bodies needed rather than what taste buds wanted, proving nothing from a farm animal went to waste and every part had purpose. The low cost made it accessible even for families with tight budgets, turning an organ most people discarded into protein-rich meals that supported health without draining finances. Sweet milk toast. When ingredients ran low between shopping trips or harvest seasons, Amish families fell back on what they called milk supper, toast soaked in warm, sweetened milk with butter melting on top. This wasn't poverty food exactly, though it certainly qualified as eating on a budget. It was comfort food in its purest form, the kind of simple meal that satisfied without pretense. Kids loved it because it was sweet and warm. Adults appreciated it because it required almost no effort and used ingredients that were always available. The preparation took longer to describe than to make. Toast some bread, tear it into pieces, place it in a bowl. Heat milk on the stove with a spoonful of sugar. Pour it over the toast. Add a pat of butter. Wait a minute for the bread to soak up the milk and soften. Eat. The whole process from start to finish took maybe 5 minutes, which mattered when you were tired from a day of work and still needed to feed a family before bed. The warm milk made people sleepy, which was probably intentional. This was often a before-bed meal, the last thing eaten before everyone headed upstairs. Some joked that milk toast was cheaper than sleeping pills and tasted better too, which made it the perfect remedy for both hunger and insomnia at the same time. What made sweet milk toast endure through generations wasn't its sophistication, but its reliability. It never failed, never disappointed, never required ingredients you didn't have. Bread, milk, butter, sugar, those were constants in every Amish kitchen, the foundation items that got restocked before anything else ran out. When the cellar was low and the pantry looked sparse, you could still make milk toast. It represented security in food form, proof that even when options were limited, nobody had to go hungry. This was cooking stripped down to essentials, showing that sometimes the most basic combinations create the most lasting comfort. Tomato egg scramble. Summer gardens produced tomatoes faster than families could eat them fresh, which led to creative ways of using them in everyday meals. Scrambling eggs with canned tomatoes and onion created a colorful, cheap breakfast that Amish farmers called poor man's breakfast, though there was nothing poor about the flavor. The tomatoes added moisture and tang to the eggs. The onions brought sweetness and texture, and together they stretched 2 eggs into enough food for 3 or 4 people when served over bread or noodles. The technique required attention to heat and timing. Too hot and the eggs turned rubbery while the tomatoes burned. Too cool and everything turned watery and bland. Amish cooks learned to keep the heat moderate, stirring constantly, letting the eggs set slowly while the tomato juice reduced into a thick sauce that coated everything. The result looked almost fancy. Bright red tomatoes studded with golden eggs and translucent onions, despite costing almost nothing to make. Served over thick slices of homemade bread, it became a meal that stuck with you through morning work. The stretching capability made this dish valuable for large families. 2 eggs alone might feed 1 person. Add a can of tomatoes and an onion, and suddenly you've got enough for several people. Serve it over bread or egg noodles, and it feeds even more. This was multiplication through addition, turning modest ingredients into abundant meals without expensive proteins or complicated techniques. The Amish understood that feeding families wasn't about having expensive ingredients. It was about knowing how to make humble ingredients work harder, taste better, and go further than anyone expected they could. Farmers always said this breakfast had more colors than a sunset and cost less than a cup of store-bought coffee, which made it popular with both the practical-minded and the poetic types. Mock chicken sandwich spread. During rationing times when meat became scarce and expensive, Amish cooks created this spread that mimicked the texture and satisfaction of chicken salad using chopped boiled eggs, celery, and homemade mayonnaise. Nobody pretended it actually tasted like chicken, but it filled the same role in packed lunches and picnic spreads, creamy, protein-rich, spreadable, and substantial enough to make a sandwich feel complete. The name stuck even after rationing ended because the spread itself proved too useful to abandon. The preparation stayed simple and reliable. Hard-boiled eggs, chop them fine, mix with diced celery for crunch, and bind everything together with mayonnaise made from eggs and oil. Some families added a tiny bit of mustard or a pinch of salt, but the base recipe remained constant across communities. The texture mattered more than the flavor. It needed to spread smoothly on bread without being too wet or too dry. Needed to hold together in a sandwich without squishing out the sides. Needed to taste rich enough to satisfy without being heavy. The economics were straightforward. Eggs cost pennies, celery grew in gardens or could be bought cheap, and mayonnaise made at home from oil and egg yolk was a fraction of the cost of store-bought versions. The resulting spread lasted several days in the root cellar, made dozens of sandwiches, and provided good protein without requiring any meat at all. Amish church gatherings still feature bowls of this spread today, not because meat is scarce anymore, but because the recipe works and people genuinely enjoy it. What started as a substitute during hard times became a tradition worth keeping, proving that sometimes necessity creates recipes good enough to outlast the need that inspired them. Dutch potato filling. Mashed potatoes and bread cubes might sound like carbohydrate overload, but in Amish households, this combination became a holiday favorite that showed up year-round whenever leftovers needed using. Dutch potato filling mixed leftover mashed potatoes with torn bread, butter, and onions, then baked the whole thing until the top turned crispy and golden. It was heavier than traditional stuffing, more substantial than a side dish, and perfect for using up two items that never stayed fresh long: yesterday's potatoes and bread that had gone slightly stale. The texture made it distinctive. The bottom stayed soft and creamy from the mashed potatoes. The middle became tender and flavorful where the bread soaked up butter and moisture, and the top developed a crunchy crust that shattered under a fork. Every bite offered different textures, all of them satisfying. The onions, cooked until sweet and soft, distributed throughout the dish and added depth that kept it from being bland. Some families added celery or herbs, but the traditional version stuck to potatoes, bread, butter, and onions, proof that complexity wasn't necessary for something to taste exceptional. One grandmother used to say this dish proved that leftovers could have better second acts than most Hollywood actors, and considering she'd never been to a movie theater, that observation was surprisingly accurate. The thrift aspect ran deep. Mashed potatoes rarely got eaten completely. There were always some left clinging to the pot or sitting in a bowl that nobody wanted to finish. Bread went stale if you baked large batches, which every Amish family did, because heating the oven once for multiple loaves made more sense than heating it multiple times for single loaves. Rather than throwing out these items or feeding them to livestock, Dutch potato filling transformed them into something people actively looked forward to eating. This was pure thrift turned into pure comfort, the kind of dish that existed because waste wasn't acceptable and creativity was necessary. The fact that it tasted good enough to serve at holidays proved that frugal cooking and quality weren't opposites. They were partners in creating food that satisfied both the budget and the palate. Noodles with cottage cheese. Hot buttered noodles tossed with cottage cheese and black pepper might sound like something invented out of desperation, but the Amish have been serving this as a main dish for generations. The combination delivers protein without requiring any meat, costs almost nothing to make, and fills you up in a way that keeps you satisfied through afternoon work. Homemade egg noodles get boiled until tender, drained while still steaming, then tossed with butter that melts into every crevice. The cottage cheese goes in next, its creamy curds coating the noodles and creating pockets of richness throughout. Black pepper adds the only seasoning needed, sharp enough to wake up the mild flavors without overwhelming them. The dish tastes richer than its simple ingredients suggest, proving that dairy and carbs together create something that feels indulgent even when it's budget cooking. Some say this dish has more cheese than a tourist's photo album and costs about the same as printing one picture. This was everyday eating in Amish kitchens, the kind of meal that appeared multiple times weekly because it worked, satisfied everyone at the table, and never required a trip to town for special ingredients. Sliced apples and sweet cream. Fresh apples poured over with sweetened cream and cinnamon became the Amish answer to dessert when baking wasn't practical. During hot summer days when firing up the wood stove would turn the kitchen into a sauna, this no-cook treat provided sweetness without adding heat to an already warm house. The preparation took less time than setting the table. Slice apples thin, arrange them in a bowl, pour sweetened cream over the top, dust with cinnamon. That's the entire process. Yet the result tasted special enough to serve at family gatherings. The cream came fresh from morning milking, still sweet and thick before any processing. The apples came straight from backyard orchards, varieties that might not win beauty contests, but delivered flavor that store-bought apples couldn't match. Sugar dissolved into the cream created a simple sauce that complemented the fruit's natural tartness. The cinnamon added warmth and depth, making everything taste more complex than it actually was. Kids considered this a treat worth getting excited about, which says something about simpler times when dessert didn't need chocolate or fancy preparations to feel like a reward. This was orchard abundance meeting dairy richness, requiring zero cooking skill and delivering maximum satisfaction with minimum effort. Pork and sauerkraut. Sauerkraut and pork scraps slow cooked together might not sound appetizing to modern ears, but this combination has anchored Amish tables for centuries, particularly on New Year's Day when it's supposed to bring good luck. The dish emerged from necessity more than superstition. Sauerkraut helped preserve meat for days without refrigeration, and the fermented cabbage's acidity broke down tough cuts into something tender and flavorful. What started as practical preservation became a beloved tradition that showed up throughout winter months whenever meat needed stretching and meals needed substance. The cooking process requires patience more than skill. Pork scraps that might otherwise go to waste, shoulder ends, rib trimmings, pieces too small for roasting, get layered with sauerkraut in a heavy pot. Low heat and long hours do all the work, the pork fat rendering out and mixing with the tangy cabbage juice to create a rich cooking liquid. The sauerkraut softens and sweetens as it cooks, losing its raw edge while maintaining enough bite to balance the rich pork. The meat falls apart into tender shreds that distribute throughout the dish. What emerges after hours of slow cooking tastes far more refined than its humble origins suggest, proving that time and temperature can elevate cheap ingredients into something worth serving to company. Rhubarb custard bars. Rhubarb grows like a weed in Amish gardens, shooting up thick stalks every spring whether anyone wants it or not. Smart cooks figured out how to turn this aggressive garden resident into desserts that balance tart and sweet without requiring expensive fruit. Rhubarb custard bars emerged as a church social favorite, combining the plant's sharp tanginess with rich egg custard in a format that traveled well and fed crowds. The base layer used simple butter pastry, pressed thin and baked just until set. The filling came together from chopped rhubarb, eggs, sugar, and cream, ingredients every Amish farm had in abundance during spring and early summer. Baking transformed the raw rhubarb's mouth-puckering sourness into something balanced and complex. The custard set around the fruit pieces, creating pockets of intense flavor surrounded by sweet richness. The bars cut cleanly into squares that held together when served, making them practical for gatherings where people ate standing up or sitting on benches. Rhubarb is proof that even garden bullies can become popular if you surround them with enough sugar and eggs. Some joke that rhubarb was the only vegetable that masqueraded as dessert successfully, though botanists would argue about the vegetable classification while everyone else just enjoyed the bars. Cornmeal dumplings in broth. Cold days demanded hot soup, but thin broth alone didn't satisfy hungry workers who'd been outside splitting wood or mucking stalls. Cornmeal dumplings solved this problem by adding substance to any liquid without requiring expensive ingredients. The Amish would mix cornmeal with just enough water to form a thick dough, pinch off pieces, and drop them directly into boiling soup or stew. The dumplings cooked quickly, absorbing the broth's flavor while releasing starch that thickened the liquid into something more substantial. Every spoonful suddenly contained solid food instead of just flavored water, turning a light soup into a filling meal. The cornmeal brought its own distinct flavor, slightly sweet, earthy, more interesting than plain flour dumplings. It also provided different nutrition than wheat, adding variety to diets that sometimes felt repetitive during long winters. The dumplings worked in chicken soup, vegetable broth, even plain salted water when nothing else was available. They never failed to bulk up whatever they were cooked in, making them reliable when meals needed stretching. The technique got passed down not through written recipes, but through watching mothers and grandmothers pinch off dough balls with practiced efficiency. Their hands moving so fast, the dumplings seemed to appear in the pot by magic rather than manual labor. Butter onion gravy. Over potatoes? Sundays meant church, and church meant gravy. But not every Sunday featured a roast providing drippings for traditional meat gravy. That's when Amish cooks turned to what they called Sunday gravy, a simple sauce made from butter, onions, and flour that turned plain boiled potatoes into something satisfying enough to serve as a main course. The process started with slicing onions thin and cooking them slowly in butter until they turned golden and sweet. Flour went in next, stirred constantly until it formed a paste that cooked out the raw taste. Milk or water got added gradually, the mixture thickening into a smooth gravy studded with soft onion pieces. Poured over freshly boiled potatoes, it created a meal that tasted far more indulgent than its humble ingredients suggested. The onions provided sweetness and depth, the butter added richness, and the flour-thickened sauce coated the potatoes in a way that made every bite satisfying. This wasn't poverty food trying to pretend it was something fancier. It was honest cooking that made the most of pantry staples. Families served this without apology, knowing that flavor doesn't require expensive proteins when you understand how to coax the best from simple ingredients. The dish proved that meat wasn't necessary for satisfaction, just skill in building flavor from what was already on hand. Vinegar green beans. Green beans stewed with onion, vinegar, and sugar created a side dish that lasted for days without any cold storage, making it valuable in Amish households before refrigeration became common. The cooking method doubled as preservation. The vinegar's acidity kept the beans safe to eat for nearly a week when stored in the root cellar. The sweet and sour flavor profile made them equally appropriate, served hot alongside pork chops or cold as a salad component. Amish cooks would simmer fresh green beans with sliced onions until both turned tender, then add vinegar and sugar in proportions that balanced tang with sweetness. The beans absorbed the flavored liquid as they cooled, developing more complex taste over time. Day-old vinegar beans often tasted better than fresh ones, the flavors having had time to meld and develop. This made them perfect for preparing ahead of church gatherings or family visits when cooking time would be limited. The dish used vegetables that grew abundantly in every garden, required no expensive ingredients, and improved rather than deteriorated with age. These beans stayed fresher than most people's New Year's resolutions and lasted considerably longer, too. The vinegar acted as both flavoring and preservative, pulling double duty in a way that exemplified Amish efficiency and practicality in the kitchen. Tapioca pudding. Small tapioca pearls cooked in milk with sugar and egg created a dessert found in nearly every Amish recipe collection, handwritten in margins and stained with decades of kitchen use. The pudding's appeal came from its reliability. It never failed to set properly, never curdled if you followed basic technique, and pleased everyone from young children to elderly grandparents. The texture made it distinctive, those little pearls creating pockets of chewiness throughout creamy sweetness. Some called them fish eyes, but that comparison never stopped anyone from eating multiple bowls. The preparation required attention, but not expertise. Milk got heated with tapioca pearls that swelled as they absorbed liquid, transforming from hard little beads into soft translucent spheres. Sugar and beaten egg went in toward the end, the egg providing richness and helping everything thicken into proper pudding consistency. The mixture needed stirring to prevent sticking, but not constant hovering. Served warm or chilled depending on season and preference, it adapted to whatever the day demanded. A drop of homemade vanilla added complexity when available, though the pudding tasted perfectly fine without it. The ingredients cost almost nothing. Tapioca bought in bulk, milk from the family cow, eggs from backyard chickens, sugar from the pantry. This was simple, soothing dessert that worked for everyday meals and special occasions alike, proving that sometimes the most basic recipes earn their place through pure dependability. Barley vegetable stew. Barley simmered with carrots, onions, and broth kept Amish workers full through long winter days without requiring heavy meat content. The grain provided substance and nutrition that vegetables alone couldn't match, swelling as it cooked until each pearl became tender and slightly chewy. Many Amish communities grew barley locally, making it cheaper and more accessible than wheat or other grains. What started as animal feed became human sustenance when cooks recognized its potential for stretching stews and adding bulk to soups. The stew came together in a single pot, everything simmering together until the barley absorbed enough liquid to become tender while the vegetables broke down into soft, flavorful pieces. The barley released starch as it cooked, naturally thickening the broth without needing flour or other additions. Each spoonful contained multiple textures: soft vegetables, chewy barley, rich broth, creating a complete eating experience from simple components. The dish reheated well, actually improving on the second day when flavors had more time to develop and marry together. Families made large batches that fed them through several meals, the stew becoming more economical with each serving. This was thrifty cooking that also happened to be nutritious and warming, the kind of food that sustained people through physically demanding days in cold weather without requiring expensive ingredients or complicated techniques that might fail. Apple fritters. Chopped apples mixed into simple batter and fried in lard created a treat that showed up at Amish breakfast tables and church suppers throughout fall and winter. The fritters used apples that wouldn't sell or were too bruised for eating fresh, the drops that fell from trees and got stepped on, the ones with wormholes that needed cutting out, the varieties too tart or too soft for keeping. Rather than wasting this fruit, Amish cooks chopped it fine, stirred it into batter made from flour, eggs, and milk, then dropped spoonfuls into hot lard until they turned golden and crispy. The outside developed a crunchy shell while the inside stayed soft and studded with sweet apple pieces. Served warm with a dusting of sugar or drizzled with honey, they tasted like indulgence despite costing almost nothing. The lard did important work beyond just cooking the fritters. It added flavor that vegetable oil couldn't match and reached temperatures that created the perfect texture. Fritters fried in lard came out lighter and crispier than those cooked in anything else. The high heat sealed the outside immediately, preventing them from absorbing excess fat and turning greasy. What emerged were golden pillows of fried dough packed with fruit, sweet and crunchy, and completely satisfying. This was scratch cooking that turned surplus into something special, proving that the best treats often come from making use of what others might throw away. Custard pie. Simple perfection defines this classic Amish custard pie, made with just 4 ingredients: eggs, milk, sugar, and vanilla extract combined in a tender pie shell. The Amish mastered the technique of creating silky smooth custard that sets without curdling, requiring precise temperature control and timing that comes from generations of practice. Traditional preparation involves scalding milk to just below boiling, then slowly tempering it into beaten eggs to prevent scrambling. The mixture gets poured into unbaked pie shells and baked at moderate heat until a knife inserted near the center comes out clean. Windowsills across Amish farmsteads often display these golden pies cooling in the breeze, their surfaces perfectly smooth and inviting. Each slice provides satisfying sweetness and creamy texture that rivals expensive restaurant desserts, proving that luxury doesn't require complicated techniques or exotic ingredients when basic skills are mastered properly. Fried cornmeal mush. Yesterday's breakfast porridge becomes today's crispy delight when Amish cooks slice-cooled cornmeal mush and pan-fry it until golden brown. The transformation from soft porridge to crispy outside, creamy inside slices demonstrates the resourcefulness that defines traditional Amish cooking. Children especially love these golden rectangles drizzled with maple syrup or topped with apple butter, creating a breakfast that costs less than most people spend on coffee. Cornmeal mush proves that even leftovers can have a second act, and sometimes it's better than the original performance. The frying process caramelizes the exterior while keeping the interior creamy, creating textural contrast that elevates humble ingredients into something special. Traditional preparation uses bacon grease or lard for frying, adding rich flavor that complements the corn's natural sweetness. This dish represents the ultimate in no-waste cooking, turning inexpensive ingredients into multiple satisfying meals. Amish potato cakes. Leftover mashed potatoes find new life in these golden crispy cakes that combine economy with comfort in every bite. Amish cooks mix cold mashed potatoes with flour, minced onions, and sometimes an egg to create patties that hold together during frying. The technique requires the right balance of ingredients. Too much flour makes them heavy, too little leaves them falling apart in the pan. Fresh bacon grease or lard provides the best frying medium, creating crispy exteriors that give way to fluffy, seasoned interiors. These cakes often appeared after large harvest dinners when families had abundant leftover potatoes that needed using before spoiling. The combination of crispy texture and familiar potato flavor makes them popular with children and adults alike. Each serving costs pennies to prepare yet provides substantial satisfaction, proving that waste not want not cooking can be both practical and delicious. Green tomato relish. Before the first frost destroys garden tomatoes, Amish families harvest green ones and transform them into tangy relish that brightens meals throughout winter. This preservation method combines chopped unripe tomatoes with onions, sugar, vinegar, and spices, creating a condiment that adds zing to meats, sandwiches, and vegetables. The Amish developed this technique to avoid wasting tomatoes that wouldn't ripen before cold weather arrived, turning potential loss into pantry gold. Green tomatoes are like teenagers, not quite ready, but full of potential once you know what to do with them. The chopping process requires patience and sharp knives, as vegetables must be uniform in size for proper preservation and appealing appearance. Traditional recipes include mustard seed, celery seed, and turmeric for complex flavors that develop during the cooking process. Every Amish household keeps multiple jars of this versatile relish, which provides vitamin C and bright flavors when fresh vegetables are unavailable. Oatmeal pie. When pecans were too expensive for pie making, resourceful Amish bakers discovered that oats could provide similar texture and crunch at a fraction of the cost. This clever substitution creates a pie that closely mimics pecan pie's appearance and satisfying texture while using pantry staples available year-round. The filling combines oats with corn syrup or molasses, eggs, butter, and vanilla to create a sweet, chewy interior that satisfies dessert cravings economically. Traditional preparation involves toasting the oats lightly before mixing, which enhances their nutty flavor and helps them hold their shape during baking. The result is a pie that surprises first-time tasters with its rich, complex flavor that belies its humble ingredients. Each slice provides the satisfaction of expensive nut pies without the premium price, making special occasions more affordable for large families. This recipe represents culinary creativity born from necessity, proving that limitations often spark the most innovative solutions. Cucumber and onion salad. Cool, crisp cucumber slices and sharp onion rings bathe in tangy Amish vinegar dressing, creating a refreshing salad that costs almost nothing to prepare. The traditional dressing combines vinegar, sugar, and salt in proportions that balance tartness with subtle sweetness, allowing the vegetable's natural flavors to shine through. Amish gardens produce abundant cucumbers during summer months, making the salad a practical way to use surplus vegetables before they spoil. The preparation requires paper-thin slicing that's best achieved with sharp knives and steady hands, creating uniform pieces that absorb the dressing evenly. Cucumbers are 96% water, which means this salad is practically a drink with crunch. This dish appears at every summer gathering from barn raisings to church picnics, where its cooling properties provide relief from hot weather. The salad improves with time as vegetables soften slightly and flavors meld, making it perfect for advanced preparation when feeding crowds economically. Buttered noodles. Handmade egg noodles tossed in rich yellow butter create the ultimate comfort food that Amish families have relied on for generations. The Amish tradition of making pasta from scratch using just flour, eggs, and salt produces noodles with a tender texture that store-bought versions simply cannot match. No garlic, herbs, or fancy seasonings complicate this dish. Just pure, simple flavors that satisfy both children and adults alike. The butter melts into every curve and fold of the warm noodles, creating a silky coating that transforms basic ingredients into something truly satisfying. This dish serves as either a hearty side or a complete meal when meat is scarce or budgets are tight. The preparation requires minimal skill but maximum patience when rolling and cutting the dough by hand. Each serving costs under 50 cents, yet provides the kind of soul-warming satisfaction that expensive restaurant dishes struggle to achieve. Amish macaroni salad. Cold pasta salad loaded with hard-boiled eggs and dressed with sweet pickle juice represents the ultimate potluck contribution in Amish communities. Traditional Amish cooks combine elbow macaroni with mayonnaise, mustard, and the secret ingredient, pickle juice, which adds tangy brightness that cuts through the richness. The salad appears at every barn raising, church gathering, and summer picnic, where one large bowl easily feeds a dozen hungry workers for under $3. Macaroni salad is like a good neighbor, reliable, always welcome, and never overstays its welcome. The eggs provide protein, while celery adds satisfying crunch, creating textural variety that keeps each bite interesting. Traditional preparation involves cooking the pasta until just tender, then shocking it in cold water to stop the cooking process and maintain the proper texture. The flavors improve overnight as ingredients meld together, making this dish perfect for advanced preparation when feeding large groups economically and efficiently. Liver and onions. During hog and cattle butchering seasons, Amish families never waste valuable organ meats, transforming beef or pork liver into surprisingly delicious meals. The key lies in proper preparation. Soaking liver in milk for several hours removes any bitter flavors while tenderizing the meat for cooking. Sliced thin and dredged in seasoned flour, liver cooks quickly in hot fat alongside caramelized onions that add sweetness to balance the mineral-rich flavors. This high-protein, high-iron dish costs almost nothing since most people avoid organ meats, making them readily available and affordable. The Amish understand that liver provides more nutrition per ounce than most expensive cuts of meat, delivering vitamins and minerals essential for hard-working bodies. Traditional cooking requires high heat and quick timing. Overcooked liver becomes tough and unpalatable. Each serving provides a week's worth of iron and B vitamins at a fraction of the cost of premium steaks. Rhubarb sauce. Tart garden. Rhubarb stalks transform into versatile sauce through slow cooking with sugar, creating a condiment that brightens countless Amish meals throughout spring and summer. The Amish prize rhubarb for its reliability. This hardy perennial produces abundant stalks year after year with minimal care, making it perfect for families seeking food security. Rhubarb is nature's way of reminding us that sometimes the sourest things make the sweetest endings. The cooking process breaks down the fibrous stalks into a smooth, thick sauce that's equally at home on morning oatmeal, fresh bread, or warm biscuits. Traditional preparation involves cutting stalks into small pieces and cooking them slowly until they completely break down, requiring no additional thickening agents. The natural pectin in rhubarb creates the perfect consistency without artificial additives. One established rhubarb patch produces enough stalks for multiple batches of sauce, providing families with months of vitamin-rich condiment that cost practically nothing to prepare. Milk pie. Only ingenious Amish bakers could transform milk, flour, and sugar into a dessert rich enough to satisfy the sweetest tooth. This Depression-era creation uses basic pantry staples to create a custard-like filling that sets beautifully without eggs or cream, proving that limitation breeds creativity in the kitchen. The magic happens during baking as milk proteins and flour combine to create a smooth, creamy texture that resembles expensive custard desserts. No crust is required. The mixture is simply poured into a buttered pie pan and baked until golden on top and set throughout. Traditional recipes call for vanilla extract and a pinch of salt to enhance the mild, comforting flavors that appeal to all ages. The cost per serving barely registers on most budgets, yet each slice delivers satisfying sweetness that rivals more expensive desserts. This humble pie represents the triumph of technique over ingredients, creating luxury from necessity. Amish peanut butter spread. Creamy peanut butter whipped with molasses or corn syrup creates a spread so irresistible that Amish church lunches never have leftovers when this appears on tables. The combination balances peanut butter's richness with molasses' deep, complex sweetness, creating flavors that both children and adults find completely addictive. Traditional preparation involves beating the ingredients until light and fluffy, incorporating air that makes the spread easier to work with and more appealing to eat. This spread is so good, it should probably come with a warning label about portion control. The mixture keeps well without refrigeration, making it practical for large gatherings where food safety is a concern. Amish families often prepare large batches for special occasions, knowing that popularity demands abundant quantities. Each sandwich made with this spread costs pennies, yet provides protein and energy that sustains hardworking bodies throughout long days. The combination proves that simple ingredients, when properly balanced, create extraordinary results. Stewed tomatoes with bread. Ripe garden tomatoes simmered with torn bread and a touch of sugar create a hot dish that defies easy categorization while satisfying hunger completely. Amish cooks developed this recipe during abundant tomato harvests when preserving wasn't possible and fresh consumption became necessary to avoid waste. The bread absorbs tomato juices while breaking down slightly, creating a texture somewhere between soup and pudding that's surprisingly comforting. Traditional preparation requires very ripe tomatoes that break down easily during cooking, releasing maximum flavor and natural sweetness that balances the bread's mild taste. The addition of sugar enhances the tomato's natural flavors, while salt brings all elements together harmoniously. This dish costs almost nothing to prepare since it uses surplus garden produce and day-old bread that might otherwise go to waste. Each serving provides vitamins, carbohydrates, and satisfaction that belies its humble appearance and simple preparation. Canned peach cobbler. Home-preserved Amish peaches shine in this golden cobbler that transforms winter pantries into summer memories with every spoonful. The traditional topping combines flour, sugar, butter, and milk to create a biscuit-like covering that bakes into golden perfection above bubbling fruit. Canned peaches are like sunshine in a jar. They brighten even the darkest winter days. Amish families preserve peaches during peak season when orchards overflow with ripe fruit, ensuring sweet treats remain available throughout cold months when fresh fruit is scarce. The cobbler stretches expensive preserved fruit to feed large families economically, with each serving costing less than a single fresh peach during off-season. Traditional baking requires moderate oven heat that cooks the topping thoroughly while allowing fruit to bubble gently, creating the perfect balance of textures. One cobbler made with a single quart of preserved peaches easily serves 8 people, making special occasions affordable even when budgets are tight. Potato and egg skillet. Diced garden potatoes fried until golden and topped with fresh eggs create the perfect Amish breakfast that fuels long days of physical labor. The cooking process requires patience, as potatoes must be cooked thoroughly to achieve the proper crispy exterior and fluffy interior that makes this dish special. Traditional preparation uses well-seasoned cast-iron skillets that distribute heat evenly and create the ideal browning that gives potatoes their distinctive flavor and texture. Fresh eggs cracked directly over the hot potatoes cook gently in the residual heat, creating perfect runny yolks that act as natural sauce for the crispy potatoes below. Cast iron skillets are like good marriages. They get better with age and proper seasoning. This hearty breakfast costs under $1 per serving, yet provides enough energy and nutrition to sustain hardworking farm hands through morning chores and beyond. The combination of protein from eggs and complex carbohydrates from potatoes creates lasting satisfaction that keeps hunger at bay. Ham hock bean soup. Dried beans transform into creamy, satisfying soup when simmered slowly with smoky Amish ham bones that add incredible depth and richness to every spoonful. The long cooking process breaks down tough bean skins while extracting maximum flavor from ham bones, creating a thick, hearty soup that feeds large families for pennies per bowl. Traditional Amish preparation begins the night before with soaking dried beans in cold water, which reduces cooking time and ensures even texture throughout the finished soup. The ham hocks provide both flavor and protein, while the beans contribute fiber and complex carbohydrates that create lasting satisfaction. Hours of gentle simmering allow flavors to meld completely while beans break down slightly, creating natural thickening that eliminates the need for flour or other additives. This economical soup represents the pinnacle of one-pot cooking, transforming inexpensive ingredients into restaurant-quality results through patience and proper technique. Amish noodle pudding. Egg noodles baked with raisins, sugar, and eggs create a dessert that blurs the line between sweet and savory in traditional Amish kitchens. This versatile dish, sometimes called kugel in certain communities, serves double duty as either dinner or dessert, depending on the day's needs and family preferences. The Amish developed this recipe as a way to use leftover noodles and transform them into something special for Sunday meals or holiday gatherings. The baking process creates a custard-like texture that holds together beautifully while maintaining distinct noodle pieces throughout each slice. Traditional preparation involves cooking noodles until just tender, then combining them with beaten eggs, sugar, and plump raisins before baking until golden. Noodle pudding proves that sometimes the best desserts are the ones that started as accidents in the kitchen. Each serving costs less than a candy bar, yet provides complex carbohydrates and protein that satisfy hunger more completely than most expensive sweets. Amish brown butter gravy. Pan drippings transform into liquid gold when Amish cooks slowly brown butter until it develops deep, nutty flavors that elevate simple meals into memorable experiences. The technique requires careful attention as butter moves from golden to perfectly browned without crossing into burnt territory, a skill passed down through generations of farmhouse cooking. Traditional Amish preparation begins with saving every precious drop of fat from roasted meats or fried foods, understanding that these drippings contain concentrated flavors too valuable to waste. The flour gets whisked in gradually while the butter bubbles and browns, creating a roux that forms the foundation for rich, flavorful gravy. This versatile sauce transforms leftover mashed potatoes, fresh noodles, or day-old bread into satisfying meals that stretch food budgets considerably. Each batch costs under $1, yet provides enough gravy to turn simple starches into filling main courses for large families. Amish egg and bread scramble. Day-old bread finds new purpose when torn and fried with fresh eggs and onions in well-seasoned cast-iron skillets across Amish farmsteads. This zero-waste breakfast represents the practical mindset that transforms potential garbage into satisfying meals that fuel hardworking bodies through morning chores. The Amish perfected this technique during times when nothing could be wasted, creating dishes that maximize nutrition while minimizing cost through creative use of leftovers. The bread absorbs beaten eggs while maintaining some texture, creating a scramble that's heartier and more filling than eggs alone. Stale bread is like a second chance at breakfast. Sometimes the comeback is better than the original performance. Traditional preparation requires medium heat and constant stirring to prevent sticking while ensuring even cooking throughout the mixture. Fresh onions add sharpness that balances the mild flavors while providing vitamins during winter months when fresh vegetables are scarce. Each serving costs pennies, yet delivers complete protein and complex carbohydrates. Apple dumplings. Whole peeled apples wrapped in tender Amish pie dough and baked in cinnamon sugar syrup create individual desserts that capture autumn's essence in every bite. The traditional technique involves rolling pastry around each apple, sealing the seams carefully to prevent leaking during the long baking process that transforms raw ingredients into golden perfection. Amish orchards provide abundant apples during harvest season, making these dumplings a practical way to use fruit that might otherwise spoil before families can consume it fresh. The syrup penetrates the pastry while the apple cooks tender inside its dough jacket, creating layers of flavor and texture that satisfy completely. Traditional preparation calls for tart apples that hold their shape during baking, preventing the dumplings from becoming mushy or falling apart. Each dumpling provides a complete dessert serving that costs less than 50 cents while delivering the comfort and satisfaction that expensive restaurant desserts struggle to match. Amish rice pudding. Long grain rice baked slowly with milk and cinnamon creates a dessert that doubles as breakfast, demonstrating the versatility that defines traditional Amish cooking. The gentle baking process allows rice to absorb milk gradually while developing creamy texture that rivals expensive custard desserts made with cream and eggs. Amish families appreciate this pudding's economy. 1 cup of rice produces enough dessert to feed 8 people generously while costing less than most families spend on a single candy bar. The slow cooking method prevents scorching while allowing flavors to develop fully, creating depth that quick cooking methods cannot achieve. Traditional sweetening uses brown sugar or molasses, which complement the mild rice flavors while adding complexity that white sugar cannot provide. Rice pudding is proof that patience really is a virtue, especially when the reward is this delicious. Each serving provides complex carbohydrates and protein that sustain energy levels while satisfying sweet cravings completely. This humble dessert represents the triumph of technique over expensive ingredients, creating luxury from necessity. In a world where grocery bills keep rising, the Amish remind us that good food doesn't have to be expensive. These cheap recipes aren't just about saving money, they're about bringing back comfort, tradition, and the joy of home cooking. Amish kitchens turn simple ingredients into hearty, flavorful meals. Tradition, thrift, and care make every dish satisfying. From soups to sweets, flavor needs no price tag. The richest meals come from creativity and resourcefulness.